as we've mentioned, Garibaldi to become a scourge on the papacy to such an extent that the papal power would lose its temporal power and completely lost its ability to control the minds, control the society, and control the religion and the general ethics of the world. That was in 1870, of course. But as great as these earthquakes were, as vast as the changes that they affected were, they themselves were inconclusive in many ways. Yes, they did. They changed the political scene beyond recognition. A person standing in AD 300 and then reintroduced to the scene of 330 would have seen nothing the same in terms of the government and even the sort of attitude of the people. Everything had been changed, it had been turned upside down. The same in the French Revolution, perhaps to an even greater degree. I mean, even the population of France and Paris had been decimated by the result of the French Revolution. But they were inconclusive in many ways, because at the end of the day, the serpent power was still in control. It may have been a different type of serpent power, it may even have been a better type of serpent power, but the flesh was still very much in control. Because after the destruction of paganism, as we've seen, we find the Roman Catholic beast with 10 horns. And it was about as bad as the dragon power, the pagan power of Rome. It was more enlightened for sure, but in terms of their attitude towards Jews natural and Jews spiritual, there was very little difference. And then, out of the French Revolution came socialism or humanism. And that is essentially opposed to anything that is true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are pure. Humanism is opposed to everything that is related to God. So, those first two great earthquakes, they did accomplish God's purpose. They put us along a sort of another mile marker towards the realization of God's plan and purpose, but they themselves didn't really solve anything. Out of the third earthquake, however, will come the greatest transformation ever known to man. At verse 18 of that chapter that Brother Jesse read for us, there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth. So mighty an earthquake, and so great. So the scriptures then tell us, look back at the time of Constantine, look back at the time of the French Revolution, look back at all the other times of bloodshed. For us living in the 21st century, some of us here will remember like the World Wars, the Second World War at least. Forget this. This is going to be a time, such a great earthquake, such a political upheaval, such as was not since men were on the earth. Isaiah 24 tells us in verse 19, the earth is utterly broken down, the earth is clean dissolved, the earth is moved exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage, and the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it. And it shall fall, and not rise again. And it shall come to pass in that day that Yahweh shall punish the host of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. And they shall be gathered together, as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison. And after many days shall they be visited. Then the moon shall be confounded, and the sun ashamed, when Yahweh Sabaoth shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and before his ancients gloriously. So the earth, it is predicted in Isaiah, will reel to and fro like a drunkard. That's an earthquake. And we believe that that's literal and figurative. In other words, we believe that at the time of the end there will be earthquakes. There will be some horrible convulsions resulting from tectonic activity. But, and probably more concerning for the world, there will be horrific political upheavals as well. One other major difference which we would do wrong to omit between the first and second great earthquakes and the third great earthquake is the actors on the scene. In the first and second great earthquake, the wicked, literally, were God's sword. We made mention of the fact that Constantine, Licinius, they were nasty pieces of work. Marat, Danton, Robespierre, they were as bad, if not worse. with the third great earthquake, what we have presented to us is the eternal Spirit, clothed with white linen, and the golden girdle company of splendid ones, Christ and his faithful brethren. So what happened then after the second great earthquake? What happened after the French Revolution? We've said that the Pope lost his temporal power. Now, this we may naturally think, and we would certainly like to think, that it would end any pretensions of the Pope to be anybody. Sadly, the worst of men don't go down without a fight. But in that very year, in 1870, papal infallibility was declared. And I quote from the Times newspaper in that year. I'm not going to read it all. The Holy Roman Church possesses the supreme and complete primacy and principality over the universal Catholic Church, which it verily and humbly acknowledges to have received with the plenitude of the power of the Lord himself in the person of St. Peter, the Prince of Apostles, of whom the Roman Pontiff is the successor. I mean, this really is the beast which looks as a lamb but speaks as a dragon. It alleges to have humbly received the plenitude of the power. I mean, anyone who wants to visit the Vatican will see the antipathy of humbleness there, or humility I should say. Anyway, it carries on. I'm going to skip some of the paragraphs, but it says, consequently we inculcate with the concurrence of the Holy Council, and we define as a dogma of faith, thanks to the divine assistance, it is that the Roman Pontiff, of whom it was said in the person of St. Peter by our same Lord Jesus Christ, I have prayed for thee, etc., cannot err, cannot be wrong when acting in his quality as supreme teacher of all Christians, and so on and so forth. So after all the dragonades, after the Inquisition, after he had been imprisoned by Napoleon, taken captive by the French, after all his hideous blasphemies, he's prepared to say that he cannot err. That's staggering. What did Genesis 3 say? I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. This has been the whole history of man. And this is the Pope, using another weapon to try and establish his supremacy in the earth. Before we look at now let's read the verses in Apocalypse chapter 16 again, verse 12. I should say where we are really. Remember that we looked at the sixth seal on Friday with the first great earthquake. We then went into the seventh seal and seven trumpets uttered their voices. The French Revolution was the concluding act of the sixth trumpet. It brought to an end the sixth trumpet and prepared the seventh trumpet to sound, which has been sounding since then. We are living in that time of we are living in the time of the sixth trumpet. We're living in the time of the seventh trumpet, with the seven vials being poured out. 6 of those vials have been poured out. So the sixth is largely being poured out, and we don't know how much left we have to be poured out on that. The drying up of the Euphrates. The Turkish power is not really a power to be contended with today, and whenever we see Turkey in the news, it's generally a weakening a bit at some point. But of course, in the days of Brother Thomas and Brother Roberts was the greatest time period of the weakening of the Turkish power. So where we are today, so the first great earthquake was in the sixth seal. The French Revolution, the second great earthquake, was at the conclusion of the sixth trumpet. And where we are today is in the living in the time of the seventh trumpet. Verse 12 of Apocalypse chapter 16. The sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of El Shaddai. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And for those who have, especially the younger I suppose, who've forgotten some of the details of this chronology, reading those verses, it's evident that Armageddon doesn't actually fall in the 7th trumpet. The Battle of Armageddon falls at the conclusion. It actually brings to a close the 6th trumpet. The 7th trumpet opens, and the 7 thunders deliver their judgments to the earth. Before we look at the 7th trumpet, just do a quick synopsis of maybe the signs of the times in one sense, just to remind us that this really is the period we are living in. We've already said that the Euphratean power has been dried up. Turkey is essentially a spent force. For those who care to look at the history of Turkey, in the early 19th century, it was a great power. And of course, for the last several centuries, since 1453, when Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, Turkey has been a power to be contended with. But in the 19th century, it was termed the sick man of Europe. It's today an agitator, but not much else. Another reminder is the fact that Israel are back in the Promised Land as an ensign. The prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 37, whereby these bones come together and stand up. The process is not complete, but we have seen an incipient fulfillment of that, as Brother Thomas correctly predicted. We're also seeing Russia take a more active role. The fall of the Iron Curtain at the end of the 80s sort of shocked some people and sort of left Russia as more of a question mark then. But under the likes of Vladimir Putin and Medvedev, we've seen Russia grow in power, certainly grow in wealth, and to the point where I personally believe that Britain and the US are in Afghanistan, not so much now because of the Taliban, but as a check on Russian progress. Remember, Russia was in Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s and withdrew. And that in itself, Britain and America being in Afghanistan with their allies, the Australians and Canadians, that in itself is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy, because Britain as the leopard power will have the various Greek islands and some of those lands that Alexander the Great annexed, like Afghanistan and the Indus. This year, a very interesting visit was made by Benjamin Netanyahu to the Kremlin. What was discussed altogether, no one will know. But as part of that visit, the Russians, Medvedev, made claims to the Russian compound in Jerusalem. Apparently the Russians had been in possession there until, I'm not sure when, I think it was the early 20th century. And the Jews have had it ever since. But Netanyahu agreed to giving the Russian compound to the Russians. When that will take place, I don't know. I don't think it's happened yet. I don't think the Russians are in control there. But that is very, very interesting. You know, we tend to think, why would Russia be interested in Israel? Without going into why we think that would be, that such a move as this, such a demand by the Russians as this, proves that Russia is interested in Jerusalem. And of course, we have had several conversations this weekend, so I'm not going to go into any detail. The decline of social order tells us that the chaotic governance, the crazy laws that are being passed, you know, Isaiah chapter 5 verse 20, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. We're living in the time when this really is the case, when the criminal is exonerated and the victim is condemned. This can't go on for much longer. The history of the Bible and the history of man has shown that it gets to a point and God has to execute judgment. There are no judgments left to execute other than the execution of judgment of the great day of God Almighty. And the last thing is earthquakes themselves. There does seem to be an increasing I'm not prepared to say for definite that we've had more earthquakes now than we ever have had, because it's difficult to compare with what the situation may have been like 600-700 years ago before records began. But it does seem that in the last few years we've had increasing tectonic activity, and particularly the scale of the earthquakes. And in actual fact, the 12th of June last month, the volcano Nabro, which is in Eritrea on the East African coast, erupted, and it emitted the highest levels of sulfur dioxide ever observed from satellites. There was a half-a-mile wide lava flow which was 50 feet deep. And this volcano they thought was extinct, and lo and behold it just went and erupted. Now, where is that volcano? It is on the southern point of the Great Rift Valley. And that is interesting because, again, we can't say for definite, but what are we told when Christ comes to Jerusalem? He stands on the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives cleaves in two. Now, of course, maybe no tectonic activity is required because Christ standing on the Mount of Olives is enough. But nevertheless, it is interesting to consider that even in the Middle East, volcanic and earthquake activity is increasing. So then, let's look at the chronology of this time period. In Eureka Volume 3, or 5, if you're looking at the Brown edition, Brother Thomas says, when this earthquake, so when this third great earthquake shall occur, Yahweh Elohim will be enthroned in Jerusalem. Now that's worth bearing in mind, because as we said, Armageddon occurs at the end of 6th vial. But this great earthquake doesn't happen until the 7th vial. So what Brother Thomas is pointing out is that the earthquake doesn't actually occur until Yahweh Elohim, or Christ and the saints, is enthroned in Jerusalem. So Armageddon has already happened. Russia has already been defeated, and Christ is then king in Jerusalem. He's not king over the whole earth. Remember the stone smiting the image? It smote the image. That is Armageddon. That is Christ demolishing, smashing the power of Russia and the Confederates. But it also has to grind the image to powder. That is the work of the third great earthquake. So at this time, at the time period of the third great earthquake, the dead in Christ have already been raised. Paul to the Thessalonians says, I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of our Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep, or precede them which are asleep. In other words, the resurrection process must take place first before we who are alive are called away to judgment. So the dead in Christ shall rise first. This has happened. Those who are alive and those who have been subjects of anastasis, the resurrection, the standing up process, they will all go to report themselves for better or worse at the judgment seat of Christ. That is in T-Man in Sinai. And Brother Thomas says again, all of them who are approved or accounted worthy to obtain that aeon, course of things, he says, or the air, are clothed with the house from heaven, and henceforth appointed to be with the Lord always in the air. What is the air? Well, he said, the aeon, the course of things. In other words, the government to be established in Jerusalem, and which will have ramifications for the whole earth. It has been suggested, and it's not a suggestion that I particularly dislike, that Christ will return on a Jubilee year, and that the kingdom will consequently be established the succeeding Jubilee year. So that would mean a 50-year period of preparation for the kingdom, a transition period of 50 years. And of course, transition is kind of a weak word when we consider that really it's a great earthquake or a time of trouble such as never was. Starting from the beginning then, let me suggest that the judgment period may be 9 years. Why do we say 9? In Leviticus chapter 23 verse 24, Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, in the first day of the month, shall ye have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein, but ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Also on the 10th day of this 7th month there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation unto you, and ye shall afflict your souls, and offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. So, there's the blowing of trumpets on the first day, and then the holy convocation on the 10th day. 9 days. So I'd like to suggest, I'm not the first to suggest this, but I'd like to suggest that the judgment period of the household takes 9 years. And I don't think that's entirely an unreasonable time frame. But I leave you to sort of think about that, or come back to me later if you like. And then perhaps you may suggest that there is 1 year for the lamb and his bride to enjoy the nuptials of the marriage, I suppose, and to prepare for the great work that is ahead. Remember that a man, if he had just married, was exempted from military service for a year. So that takes us to 10 years then. So 10 years after Christ's return, 10 years I suppose after the resurrection, the lamb and his bride are ready to go forth to execute the judgments written. Now, remember Christ's parable about that we are the salt of the earth? Well, if the salt is removed, then the savour or the preservation is lost. The earth is bad enough as it is, but when the saints are removed, when they all taken away to Sinai, the state of the world rapidly deteriorates. It may not be a reign of terror, but I believe it probably will be a fairly terrifying time. And Luke 21, Christ said, When you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter therein too. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. And when these things come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. You know, the Romans compassed the army of Jerusalem and then retreated. That was the sign for the faithful to get out, to leave. Perhaps we've had enough signs of the times now to know that Christ is soon to return. And then there will be this period where the earth just declines into all sorts of chaos. And when the governments of the earth panic as they see their enemies arming to the teeth, when even the weak will say, I am strong. So after this 10 years period then, the 9 years of judgment and the 1 year preparation, Christ and his saints set off from Timan, from that Sinai Peninsula, on their global conquest. But first, as you said, Christ has to bring to a close the 6th vial and re-establish the throne of David, upon which he will sit for 1,000 years. This is the first part, obviously, is Armageddon. And we're not going to go into that because we're all well aware, due to the lectures that we give every week, or whatever frequency we have, that the prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39 gives us all the details surrounding the Battle of Armageddon. But Christ stands on the Mount of Olives. It projects the one half of there's a great earthquake, and the one half of the mountain is projected towards the north and the other half towards the south, and leaves a very great valley between. This is all preparatory. It's part of the judgments on Gog. I believe that many of Gog's army will die as a result of that. But also, it'll be preparatory for the setting up of the temple. Now imagine the results of an earthquake which splits the Mount of Olives in two. It's not exactly a mountain like those in the Rockies, but to split the mountain in two, that's pretty incredible. And apparently experts have been asked on what they anticipate the effect of that would be. Now of course God can put a check, he can put a plug in each of the sort of the fissures running out from the earthquake to stop it affecting the world. But this is what the experts said. They said that if you could get an earthquake which was enough to split the Mount of Olives in two, the result would be that very few buildings of 2 or more stories would be left standing in the earth. And that's the opinion of the experts. They may be wrong, but I don't think it takes a genius to work out that that's a pretty horrific sight to see a mountain splitting in two. This then is at the time of Armageddon, and concludes Armageddon, and it concludes the work of the 6th vial. Ezekiel chapter 38 tells us, so that the fishes of the sea, and the fowls of the heaven, and the beasts of the field, and all creeping things that creep upon the earth, and all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence, and the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground, and I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, saith Adonai Yahweh. Every man's sword shall be against his brother. So you can see again, God works in many multifaceted ways. You've got the sword, and you've got the earthquake. And Brother Thomas says that this is an earthquake in the literal sense, but it's also an earnest of a more terrible and extensive political earthquake in the pouring out of the 7th vial. At this time, Israel had delivered. 2/3 will have been cut off. Half of the city of Jerusalem have been taken into captivity. Maybe they've been taken to Egypt by Russia, to be taken out of Egypt again by Christ. And Christ enters into Jerusalem. Psalm 24, those beautiful words, lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lift up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory, the Jews ask? They're looking for Messiah, but this is Jesus apparently. Who is this King of glory? Yahweh, strong and mighty. Yahweh, mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, even lift them up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? They still don't understand. Yahweh Tzevaoth, he is the King of glory. They understand that the Christ who they crucified and whose blood has been on their heads ever since is the Messiah that has come to save them. The defeat of Russia at Bosra ends any Gentile hope of supremacy in Israel. Well, maybe it doesn't end the hopes, but it certainly ends any successful invasion in Israel. A quote from Eureka again, when this earthquake shall occur, Yahweh Elohim will be enthroned in Jerusalem. This appears, he says, from Joel chapter 3 verse 16, where it is written, Yahweh shall roar out of Zion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem. The great voice of this vial, and the heavens and the earth shall shake, but Yahweh shall be the hope of his people, and the strength of the children of Israel. This, he says, may be called the epoch of earthquakes, for the conclusion of the 6th vial is signalized by an earthquake that divides the Mount of Olives and projects one half of the mount towards the north and the other half towards the south, and leaves a very great valley between. This shakes the earth while Gog is in the land, and accompanies the presence of Yahweh there, who says, all the men upon the face of the land shall shake at my presence, and the mountains shall be thrown down, and the towers shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. And I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, and so forth. This, he says, will be an earthquake in the most literal sense, but it may also be accepted as the earnest of that more terrible and extensive political earthquake of the 7th vial, of which the Spirit speaks in Haggai 2, verses 6 and 21, saying, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth, and the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all nations, and the Chemdath, or the glory of all nations, Uvahu, shall they come. And I will fill this house with glory, saith Yahweh Tzevaoth. So again, he's saying that the prophecies, which are more numerous than I realized before this study, the prophecies of earthquakes have twofold fulfillment. They're both literal, and they refer to this great earthquake politically in Apocalypse chapter 16. Thus, the 7th vial opens with Jesus sitting upon David's throne. The glory will have come to David's throne. Jerusalem will once again be the city of the great king. The stone, that stone of Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2, has smashed the image on its feet. but it has not yet ground the image to powder. This is the work of the seventh vial. This is the third great earthquake, such was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. Now, to look at this, we have to, if we look, when we looked at Apocalypse chapter 6 for the first great earthquake, we found that there were additional details in chapter 12. The same here, we have the mention of the great earthquake, but some of the details are given in chapter 14. So in Apocalypse chapter 14 verse 1, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, and before the four beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone, etc. And what we have here is three angels. The first angel, all these are subsequent to Armageddon. All these angels are sent to carry out their work while Christ is established and enthroned in Zion. The first angel, in verse 6, is the angel with the Aeonian Gospel proclamation. I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the Aeonian Gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and so on. Now, what this is an invitation for the nations of the world to kiss the Son, lest he be angry. Accept Christ. Christ is the new king. You are no longer king over Britain or Queen, whatever it might be. You are no longer king of Portugal. Accept Christ as the new king of the world. This opportunity, and it is a great opportunity, and will have different results. This opportunity may take 10 years. Brother Thomas says, Now as to the precise time after Christ's advent and the justification of his household by Spirit, in which this proclamation through mid-heaven shall be made, it may be remarked that it is immediately consequent upon the smiting of the Assyro-Gogian image upon the feet by the stone tower, and before the grinding of its metallic and clay fragments to powder. It will therefore be in the interval between the Armageddon overthrow of the sixth vial and the outpouring of divine wrath upon the air of the seventh. This interval will be the period of this remarkable angel proclamation. Somewhere, Brother Thomas says that there will be a kind of a sultry period. Armageddon will have happened. Russia is now a spent force as well. Europe, to all intents and purposes, has suffered a defeat because they were confederate with Russia, but have not lost their sovereignty. Russia is gone. Not so Europe. So this proclamation goes out throughout the world, giving the opportunity to the nations to accept Christ. I continue with Brother Thomas's quote from Eureka. He says, The Armageddon discomfiture of the belligerents in the land of Israel, that is, of the lion power of Sheba, Dedan and Tarshish, and of its antagonist, the Assyro-Gogian Confederacy of the North, at Bozrah and elsewhere, will put Yahweh Tzebaoth in possession of Jerusalem, the holy city, which he occupies as the Lamb, with the 144,000. Standing thus upon Mount Zion, the eternal Spirit, in multitudinous manifestation, is in his dwelling place without fear, as dry heat impending lightning, as a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. Can I stop there and just remind people, we aren't in the time of the great earthquake yet. This is the warning of it. God is a fair God. He gives the nations of the world time. He gives them opportunity. He would be well within his right not to give them any opportunity. They have the English Bible. They can do what they want with it. But God is more than fair. He is still as the calm and sultry atmosphere which precedes the tempest, and stands as the uplifted ensign upon the mountains, ready for the manifestation of those terrible judgments in the earth, under the outpouring of which the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. In the still dry heat of impending vengeance, the Pentecostian proclamation of liberty and return is made, after which the great trumpet is blown by Yahweh Tzebaoth, the jubilee trumpet of the judgment of the great day. He says this will take time and possibly years. The deity is never in a hurry, but deliberate, effective, sure. We need not be surprised if 10 years were consumed in the proclamation of the development of this result. So, in actual fact, 10 years would fit nicely, because we've already had 10 years. Then at the end of 10 years is Armageddon. Then is the Aeonian Gospel, with Christ the newly established King of Zion, of Israel. Then you have this 10-year opportunity, this sultry period, whereby the nations are given an opportunity to accept Christ, to kiss the Son, lest he be angry. And then we know that there's going to be war with 1 hour with the beast. And that hour, if we do the apocalyptic maths for that, is 30 years, which we're not going to go into now. So that would take us to 50 years. He says, these 40 years after the manifestation of the Son of David and his mighty ones on Mount Zion are the period of the building again of the tabernacle of David and of the setting up of his ruins, as it was in the days of old, the exodal period of the gathering together under one king of all the tribes of the house of Jacob. He says these 40 years will be the most important and terrible of the world's history. They are the period of the world's transition from what it calls self-government to the government of Christ and his brethren. And of course, the 40 years is typical of the 40 years reign of David. Before Solomon, who was a type of Christ in his reign on earth, before Solomon could reign, David had to subdue all his enemies, and that is just the work of Christ in the 40 years before the establishment of the kingdom, when the antitypical Solomon, he as the antitypical Solomon, will reign over the earth. So Christ then, he's enthroned in Zion and sends his ambassadors to proclaim this Aeonian gospel, and it's twofold. Chapter 18 is a repetition of this Aeonian gospel. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. That's what the Bible tells us God thinks of Roman Catholicism. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. Now who's this calling out? It's not calling out the saints. The saints are already with Christ. It must be the Jews. It must be the diaspora. Now Judah has been saved. Judah, remember, 2/3 of them were cut off. But we still have the 10 tribes who have yet to accept Christ. Isaiah 8 tells us, And he shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling, and for a rock of offence to both the houses of Israel. Well, by this point, by the time the Aeonian gospel is proclaimed, he's been a stone of stumbling twice in actual fact to Judah, at his first advent and now at his second advent, and they've been saved. But the 10 tribes, to all intents and purposes, they know nothing about Christ. They were scattered by the Assyrians and never returned, unlike the tribes of Judah who did return after the Babylonian captivity. So he's been a stone of stumbling to Judah, but not to the 10 tribes. So the next 40 years will be a purging of the 10 tribes as they come out of the nations, as there was a purging in the day when they came out of Egypt, led by Moses. Now the second thing we need to bear in mind with this Aeonian Gospel, the second element of the results, is that, as we've said, it gives the nations opportunity to accept Christ. Yet, says Psalm 2, have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. Yahweh hath said unto me, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, and thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Kiss the son, lest he be angry, and he perish from the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. What is to be the result? Do I have a quote here? No, I don't. Somewhere in Matthew, we know of the parable of the sheep and the goats. Now this is the prediction of the response of the nations to Christ. The Anglo-Indian power, the British Indian power with the young lions, will accept this call. They will still have been judged. Their populations will have been decimated by the various judgments, famine, pestilence, and so on and so forth. But at this point, they will accept the call to fear the deity and give honour to him. They will place their maritime at the disposal of Christ, and that maritime will then be used to bring back God's sons from far. To bring back my sons from far and my daughters from the ends of the earth, Isaiah 43. They will, from now on, accept the law which goes forth from Zion. Isaiah 42, he shall not fail nor be discouraged till he have set judgment in the earth. And the isles, the far-flung parts of the world, like Canada, America, Britain to an extent, New Zealand, Australia, shall wait for his law. But on the other hand, there will be those prophesied in Psalm 2 again. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and their rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. These are the nations of Europe. This is the apocalyptic earth, kings of the earth. This is the apocalyptic earth. These are the nations who, for the best part of 2,000 years, have become accustomed to worshipping the beast in his image. No doubt with hordes of South Americans and those from Asia-Pacific countries who have adopted Catholicism. Thus, there is a divide, a great divide between the sheep and the goat nations. And I saw the beast, and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. Now, chapter 14, we have to look at the second angel. And I've nearly run out of time and we haven't even started the third great earthquake. I don't have much to say because John was told that he couldn't write the things of the seven thunders. So we will be, to an extent, speculating on the seven thunders. Now Brother Ed did a very good job of indicating the march of the rainbowed angel, but as I said, I'm not going to go into that this afternoon. So the first angel messenger sounded the good news of the Aeon in mid-heaven after the manifestation of the Son of God in Mount Zion. The second angel has the mission of overthrowing Babylon the Great. And this is the work of the second great earthquake. Deuteronomy chapter 32 tells us, I will make mine arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh, and that with the blood of the slain and of the captives, from the beginning of revenges upon the enemy. Rejoice, O ye nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and to his people. That's pretty bloodthirsty poetry, but that's what God is going to do to the people who have blasphemed his name and persecuted the saints. Daniel 12, at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time the book shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And Psalm 149, who doesn't love these words? Let the saints be joyful in glory, let them sing aloud upon their beds, let the high praises of God be in their mouth, and a two-edged sword in their hand, to execute vengeance upon the heathen and punishments upon the people, to bind their kings with chains and their nobles with fetters of iron, to execute upon them the judgment written. This honour have all his saints. Praise ye Yahweh. Now, I'll interrupt my thoughts there a minute just to say we need to understand the book of the Apocalypse correctly. We need to understand that it's not a futurist book, nor is it a preterist book. It hasn't all happened, and neither has none of it happened. It's a continuous historic prophecy. Most of it has happened, and we are living in a time when it's about to come to its completion. We have to see the beast mentioned in here, the recipient of God's judgments, as the Roman Catholic system. Because when those who have been faithful and slain by this system will be resurrected, they will thoroughly enjoy the honour of executing those judgments as avengement upon the blood which they have, and which the Catholics have unrighteously slain. We should long for this day. Alas, says Jeremiah, for that day is great, so that there is none like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Turn you, says Zechariah, to the stronghold, you prisoners of hope. Even today do I declare that I will render double unto thee, when I have bent Judah for me, filled the bow with Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece, and made thee as the sword of a mighty man. So we can see that Judah and Ephraim, for the first time since the divide under Jeroboam, will act in unison in executing these judgments with the saints as their military leaders. That's the work of the second angel. And the third angel is like a continuation, because verse 9, the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. So Babylon, the great city, Rome, has gone down in the abyss now. In fact, the whole Roman Catholic system has been shaken. There is no names of blasphemy enthroned upon the Capitoline Mountain. Popes, cardinals, bishops, priests and deacons, St. Peter, basilicas and churches, and monastic dens of foul spirits and all unclean and hateful birds, and all things lusted after by the beastly soul of the drunken harlot of the earth, will have subsided into that volcanic abyss, to be found no more at all. But something more is necessary, because there still remain the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her, and the merchants of the earth who have enjoyed their revenues as a result of Roman Catholicism. Roman Babylon will be now, at this time, where Sodom and Gomorrah are. But the kings and priests of Europe survive. And what do they do? Chapter 18, verse 9. The kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her, when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgments come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. They are more concerned for the loss of their income than they are for serving truth. Verse 14 of chapter 17, these shall make war with the Lamb, and of course the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Europe has gone through war after war, one king establishing himself over another. First Reich, Second Reich, Third Reich, you name it. Europe has been full of wars, from people asserting their authority over others, but here they are to learn a terrible and bloody lesson that Christ is Lord of lords and King of kings. But they will establish what you may call another crusade, a 21st century crusade. The Order of Lazarus, you can imagine it, the Templar Order, the Order of the Cross, they will all be resurrected, and in the pretense of another holy war will descend upon the mountains of Israel to put an end to this people who they think is Antichrist. In 1590, the Jesuit priest Francisco Ribera predicted, I mean, he obviously knew his book, he obviously knew his Bible, but he turned the predictions of the apocalypse on its head. He predicted that Antichrist would come, that he would rebuild the temple in Israel, he would be received by the Jews, and he would attempt to conquer the world. This prediction has been fixed very much in the mind of Catholics and some of their harlot daughters as well. And when Christ does return and fulfills those prophecies, the kings and the nations of Europe will be well primed to march under the banner of the cross to try to defeat Christ. But, verse 10, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. And they have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. We might have spoke a little on the division of the city into three parts, but that's fairly complicated for even if we did have time, so we'll skip that. And we'll just conclude by reminding ourselves that, remember we mentioned yesterday that the guillotine was designed by people looking for a humane means to execute people, and in the end they had to come up with other means because the blood poured through the streets of Paris. In Constantinople in 1453, when the Ottomans defeated the Eastern Catholics, the blood actually extinguished some of the fires that had been started there. And this is a great earthquake such as was not since men were upon the earth. Brother Thomas says, after the hail of talent weights ceases, that's the infliction of this hail, after this ceases, the wrath of the seventh vial burns no more. The beast and the false prophet are destroyed. The dragon is bound and shut down in the abyss. The 10 horns are conquered, and nothing remains but the new Jerusalem government, ruling in righteousness a world of regenerated nations, blessed in Abraham and his seed for 1,000 years. And he concludes his section on this by saying the purpose of the second and third angel judgments, so that the purpose of the third great earthquake, if you like, is fourfold. First, to avenge the blood of the saints and witnesses of Jesus shed by the spiritual and temporal rulers of the Greek or Latin nations. Secondly, to render vengeance to the rebellious who refuse to obey the gospel announced in their first angel proclamation. Thirdly, to develop the mercy decreed for Yahweh's land and the 12 tribes of Israel. And fourthly, that all adversaries being subdued, the surviving population of the earth may rejoice as the reconciled people of the Holy One of Israel, in whom and in his father Abraham all the families of the earth are blessed. How often we say in our praise, and how glorious are those words, the earth shall be filled with the glory, the knowledge of the glory of Yahweh as the waters cover the sea. Gone are the dark days of today, when superstition is the order of religion, and when justice is not executed speedily. Priestcraft and the abominable systems of churchdom will be gone. Now the radiant light of divine truth shines forth from Zion. Apocalypse chapter 22. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it. And his servants shall serve him, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. And there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. Some Christadelphian movements tell us that the earth has already been blessed in Abraham in the proclamation of the gospel. Let's put such trash in the bin and recognize that this is when the nations are blessed in Abraham, when Christ is ruling from Zion, and when the earth is forced to accept him. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. Even so come, Lord Jesus.